you very much, Dr. Tsai. And thank you very much also to Dr. Huang and to Dr. Chen and Sunny, who took me out to a very nice lunch today. I'm sorry that I only have a few hours to spend in LA today before I have to fly back home. I just came here from Houston. Yesterday I gave a talk also in Houston to the Taiwan Community Center there. It's been really a thrill. It's a thrill and it's an honor for me to be invited to these events to commemorate this very important occasion. So the event that we are commemorating is occurred in 1947, and it started February 27th, 1947. And just to give some background, because I know there are some people who, well, there are people with varying familiarity with the events of 1947 here and with Taiwanese history. So I wanted to just summarize it here. So this is in Chinese, actually. This is the plaque that is seen in the 228 East Park in Taipei. And I was very pleased to see this there when I went in 2012. The last time I'd been to Taiwan was in 1990, and there was no mention of anything about 228 at any of the public places at all. So I was pleased to see this, especially that this is the story and that it's there and it can't be changed. It's in bronze. So and this is one thing I wanted to talk about the importance of telling the story and of people knowing it. So just to give some background, so 1947, it was the very beginning of the current administration. We can just leave the lights where they are. Thank you very much. So in 1947, so Taiwan had actually been a Japanese colony from 1895 till 1945. So at the end of World War II, Japan surrendered and withdrew from Taiwan, leaving a power vacuum there, which at first delighted the Taiwanese people because they had always been overtly treated as second-class citizens under the Japanese. Shortly thereafter, so meanwhile on China, there was civil war between the Chinese nationalists who had, by force, unified China, and so between the nationalists, or the KMT, Kuomintang, those all mean the same thing, and the Chinese communists who gained power because of dissatisfaction with the nationalist regime. So the communists obviously won in the end, but so they were starting to win in 1945, by 1947, they lost really the seat of their power. They were able to move to Taiwan. They moved their base there, took up, filled the power vacuum left by the Japanese, and still left some forces on China with the intent that they would retake the mainland and relocate back to China. So, so initially there was a governor, Chen Yi, on Taiwan. Initially the Taiwanese people were really happy that they were now going to be ruled by people from China, which for the most part their ancestors were from it as well. So initially they were excited that they were now going to be ruled by their own people, their own brethren. But then when the Nationalist Party and the soldiers actually came over, and it turned out that their focus was really using Taiwan as a resource to feed the troops in China, they began to be less pleased. So there began to be, more crime, there began to be more economic instability because the nationalists were basically plundering the resources of Taiwan. They took all the top administrative positions and all the important business positions as well. They took land and housing away from Taiwanese people, and basically, also they shipped a lot of the food, the rice, back to China. And so the economy in Taiwan was in a shambles. They had crime, they had corruption. They were very displeased. So this all came to a head February 27, when a policeman, the Tobacco Monopoly Bureau, tried to confiscate cigarettes from a woman who was selling them without a license. They were foreign cigarettes, and she was supposed to have a license. She refused to give them up, and the policeman struck her on the head with a pistol, and the surrounding people erupted in rage. The police shot into the crowd, killing a Taiwanese person, and for the next few days there were demonstrations, there were uprisings, and the Taiwanese people occupied, they took over many administrative offices, the radio station, and so forth. They were for the most part, unarmed. Some of this was done with fisticuffs, but on the whole, since there were far more Taiwanese people than people who came over from the mainland, they were able to do this. And as the days progressed, leaders of the Taiwanese community got together and said, this is our chance. We can try to settle, we can try to ask for our demands in a peaceful way. We could try to do this by force. We could win because we have more, but we were going to do this the right way, and that maybe the U.S. will support us, the West will support us. So they put together a list of 32 demands, basically demanding civil liberties, civil rights, voting equality, and such, and equal representation in the government, and presented these demands, called the 32 demands, to Governor Kenyei. So Governor Kenyei pretended to negotiate with these guys. So it seemed like things were going well. This was going to be a peaceful, rearrangement of the administration. However, at the same time that Kenyei was pretending to negotiate, he was calling up Chiang Kai-shek on China, and Chiang Kai-shek was sending over troops. So really, Kenyei was just stalling for time until his troops could get there. So on March 7th, or 8th, I believe, March 7th, the troops arrived, and they had been told, these soldiers who had just been fighting a civil war against communists who had been slaughtering them, were told. So these soldiers were told that there was a communist uprising on Taiwan and they had to suppress it. So they arrived on Taiwan and they basically killed on sight anybody they saw in the street. This killing continued for some days, and it also became much more systematic. They took the list of all the people who were in that settlement committee who wrote those 32 demands, and they killed all those people. And they went through, they tried to target all of the leaders of the Taiwanese community and basically eliminate them. So this was suppressed. Any talk of this was suppressed for about 40 years during martial law. Any mention of it, there was no mention of it in any history textbooks. We're not allowed to talk about it in school. I've talked actually to in Houston, I talked to some people who are my age and grew up in Taiwan and just came over here recently, and they told me that they did not know anything about 228 until they were in college or so. So really it was very well suppressed that this ever happened. And when it finally was recognized, it was called the February 28th incident. So, good. We both listed this one? So, it's called the, is this, can you hear it, or is it the other one better? Is this okay? This one's better. Okay, so, did you Hello? Okay. So they called it the February 28th incident, which really it isn't, because it wasn't just about one incident that happened on February 28th. What happened was a series of massacres, and it happened in February and March. But I think what this shows, the fact that they suppressed any mention of it for 40 years, that when they finally did mention it, they called it this trivializing name. It just shows how much the authoritarian government of the Republic of China at that time, that they feared the power of words and of stories. And that's partly what I wanted to talk about today. So, I was born here. No, that's fine. It's fine. It's supposed to be blank. So, so I was born in the Cambridge area, and like many people in Taiwan, also I did not know of the term 228, and I did not know. I have not heard of February 28th. I grew up in a mostly white town. My parents really believed in assimilation. But at the same time, my parents did tell us stories about their upbringing. And they told us about growing up thinking that they were Japanese and being rather shocked when the Japanese left and they were then told that actually you're not Japanese. You are now you're Chinese. Well, first you're Taiwanese, and then when the Chinese came, now you're Chinese, and you no longer have to speak Japanese at school. Now you have to speak this new language, Mandarin. And you're not allowed to speak Taiwanese again. So they told us all about that. I'm going to take questions at the end if you don't mind. So so they told us stories about that. They told us stories about how when the nationalists came, they were really excited, but then they weren't so excited when the nationalists actually did come. And they told us they had very dim memories of being very small, being told to stay at home because people were being killed outside. It was dangerous outside. My mother remembers that her older sister was told to bind her breasts because girls were being raped. But they didn't really have a larger picture of things because at that time, because everything was censored. At the time of the massacres, there was nothing about it on the news, of course, nothing on the radio. There was no internet, of course, there's no Twitter. And then after that event, they weren't allowed to talk about it. So they really had a very sort of a child's view of what happened, and not really the larger picture. They also told us about emigrating to the United States and about the Taiwanese community here, and about how even here they felt monitored, because they were. And I grew up with my parents sort of fearing politics, and occasionally in the Boston area we'd get together with, they had Taiwanese American events at MIT or something. We would go there, and as soon as somebody started getting up and talking about politics, my father would get us up and we would leave. He was afraid, and with good reason, because there were spies. So so that's how I grew up, with this sort of general sense of what being Taiwanese meant, that there were Taiwanese, there were all, and that they felt distinct from the people who came later from the mainland, and that they felt suppressed, that they had some. Actually some nostalgia about the Japanese occupation. So, and also my mother would tell me, would sing sometimes also songs that were Taiwanese, and one of these was, Yahui. And so the text of this song is, oh dear, it's not, it's rainy night flower, blown to the ground by the wind and rain, no one takes heed of you. When your petals touch earth, they will never return to life. So she would sing this song, and then she would say, no one but the Taiwanese understand what this song means. And I would think, you're right, because I don't know, why is, this depressing song, I don't get it, why this, why this of all the depressing songs, why this, it means so much to so many people. So we'll get back to that later. I think I figured out what it was a little bit later. So, in addition to all these stories, we also had examples of censorship in our house, which were kind of interesting and fully sort of supported my parents' view of Taiwanese history. So this is a pirated version of the World Book Encyclopedia that my parents bought in Taiwan in 1971. Back then, they didn't really abide by the copyright laws, so you could go to Taiwan and buy Xerox copies of all kinds of books for vastly cheaper than you could get them at home. So there was one, so when we went back and I guess I was 4, we carried these books all the way home, the entire encyclopedia. And the interesting thing about this is that not only was it copied, but it was also censored. And it was censored in a really obvious way. So, for example, so every article that has anything about Taiwan has pieces of it missing. So, for example, so they put this stamp here when they start talking about Taipei and then nothing. You get this nice stamp for the publishing company. And then here, for example, this is the article on a little bit later. So this says, with the defeat of Japan in World War II, and then it's blank. So when I was a child, I would go, when I was in elementary school and junior high, I would go to the library and I would look at the real version and see what was missing. And with the magic of eBay, I found an actual 1971 World Book Encyclopedia just to compare, because I thought it was really interesting. So this is, so this is where there was that stamp, the publisher's stamp, and so it says, when communists overran the mainland of China in 1949, Formosa became the refuge of the nationalist Chinese, and it talks about how Chiang Kai-shek had to move back. So this was all censored because if you went, and as I said, even in 1990 when I went to Taiwan, the official story that was in, and this was after martial law was repealed, even though there was still censorship. The official story was that Chiang Kai-shek united China and then moved to Taiwan. And there's no explanation of why. You're just supposed to believe that he just wanted to go there, and then someday he will reunite with retake China. So basically, in this whole encyclopedia, there's no mention of communism, Mao, or anything like that. You could read the whole thing and not know that China was communist. So this is the part where it says when with the defeat of Japan in World War II, they left Formosa. So basically, it's basically all that history about the communists. And this is an example of the article in China. You can see that there's a big blank space. There's an awful lot of white space here. And if you look at if you compare, you can see that actually there's, I wish I could, let me just try to do this without falling over. There. Okay, well, I think you can mostly see it anyway. So there's, this is the real version. So there's a timeline and facts that, like, for example, that it's a communist dictatorship. Yes. Form of government, communist dictatorship. So here they just put in a nice picture. So they put in a nice painting. And then here where there's a communist parade, they just put this nice administrative building here in the Taiwanese censored version. And here as well, you can obviously see that this is all they're hiding stuff here. This is an actually different typeface. And here's, well, you can see, so the history, the important dates in China end in 1945. Here they obviously continues. Oh yeah, I should say one of the things that they eliminated in the Formosa article, one of the things that they blanked out was the fact that the U.S. gave a substantial amount of aid to the Taiwanese government after World War II. Because part of the rhetoric also of the administration, Taiwan's administration, was that they had performed this economic miracle, but they didn't mention that they got about $3 million from the U.S. too. But I mean, I'm not diminishing the importance of the economic work that they did, which was significant. They had smart people working there, but they also, in addition to taking a lot of, in addition to other things, in addition to their economic programs, they also got an awful lot of aid. All right, so all this was interesting to me, and it brewed in my head. But at the same time, I was, a normal American suburban kid. I grew up with a love of reading. I just loved to read books, and I also loved to play the violin. So that's pretty much what I was pursuing. My parents, in the back of my mind, were always saying, "Oh, you should be a doctor." But people will be familiar with that. As I was the youngest child, I was lucky because my parents already went through a lot of struggles with my older brother and my older sister, trying to get them to do what they, to go to medical school and to marry a nice Taiwanese boy. But so by the time they got to me, they're just like, just go to college and find a nice guy. I don't care what race he is or anything. So when I went to Harvard, I was sort of saying that I loved to play the violin. I really actually wanted to go to a conservatory and play professionally. But in the end, I decided to go to Harvard. And so just because of that, and my parents were thrilled enough that I was going to Harvard that they were okay with me actually majoring in literature. They didn't give me any grief about it. And so that's what I did. I didn't have any grand plan. I just loved to read, and I was really interested in seeing how stories worked, how the books worked, and analyzing them. And I thought that was really interesting. So that's what I did, without any particular plan. And after college, I still didn't really know what I wanted to do. I had started singing, and this is the privilege of being second generation. I wasn't worried about surviving. I was just worried about doing what I wanted to do. So I studied opera, and I really wanted to study more. So I went to Indiana University for a master's degree. So my parents were not, very thrilled about this either, but they were still nice about it. And they were, still talking to me, and they. So it was really at this point in 1989. I was about to go to Indiana, and I was sitting in my parents' kitchen, and my mother was cooking, and I guess I wasn't being a very good daughter and not helping her out very much, but I was sitting there, and I had this sudden image of a little boy sitting on the floor of his parents' house in Taiwan. And it was such a vivid image. I could smell it and see, I could feel how he felt, which was sad. And so I ran down and typed it out on the typewriter, because it was that long ago. And it was then that I really realized this is what fiction can be. It's not just pushing words around, it's actually having an image or a world in your head and communicating it to the reader. So then, with all the excitement of a novice who knows nothing about what I was going to, who knew nothing about what I was getting into, I started writing a novel. So at Indiana, I thought, well, I want to write a novel, but I had studied European literature, and I wanted to be like Tolstoy or Dickens or something like that. And I didn't want to, just write about my parents. So I took the boy and I took him out of Taiwan and put him in an American suburb. And I said I was going to write this great American novel, but I was going to have him go back to Taiwan, just because for some reason I couldn't resist that. I wanted to have some part of Taiwan in there. The problem was I couldn't find any information about Taiwan. This was 1989, so as I said, there was no more martial law, but there was a national security law article that basically still impeded civil rights, that impeded freedom of speech. And so there was nothing available at the Indiana libraries, and really anywhere. So I was forced to call my parents and ask them for information about Taiwan. And as I did so, I discovered, in fact, something that alarmed me greatly, which was that the stories they were telling me were far more interesting than the story that I was writing. And this was a little bit of a roadblock for me. And another roadblock was the lack of information. And also, well, I should say it was the lack of information. One of the reasons I remember this was 1989, and to give you some context, is because I remember my mother telling her friend, her Taiwanese friend, oh yeah, Julie's writing a novel about Taiwan, about Taiwanese people. And her friend said, somebody just did that. And my mother was like, who? And she said, this girl named Amy Tan, she just wrote this book called The Joy Luck Club. So of course, the Joy Luck Club is not in Taiwan at all. I thought that was kind of interesting. This shows you the depth of I guess, brainwashing by the Taiwanese government. But anyway, yeah, and I also remember talking to a former roommate of mine who had lived in Taiwan. She was not Asian herself, but she had spent some of her childhood in Taiwan and gone to school there and actually majored in East Asian Studies at Harvard. And I told her I was writing this book, and she said, oh, but Amy Tan's book talks about the rape of Nanjing and all these classic Chinese things, and I said, well, the Taiwanese had some hard times too. After the war, and she said, like pshaw, like she, and I knew that she was wrong to dismiss the tragedies of Taiwanese history, but I really didn't have enough information to counter that. So I really, so that was really a problem for me at the time. And then my other issue was simply that I felt I didn't have enough world experience to really write the kind of book that I wanted to write then. Maybe this was an excuse, but I felt I had grown up in a very sheltered life. I'd grown up, at the time that I was growing up, my parents were well off. I had a happy childhood. I went to Harvard and studying opera, and I didn't feel that this was like a really deep point of view. So it was at this point that and I like to think that it was just my own decision and not because I'm Taiwanese that I went to medical school. And it actually was a period of growth for me. I think just the meeting people from all different walks of life, and in times of crisis, all this sort of learning a lot about myself, since it was a very difficult time for me. It made me grow up. And so by the time, let's see, that I finished medical school and residency, I started working, I got married, I was pregnant with my first child. And then it was about 2000 or so, 2001, and I said, you know what? I think it's okay to sit down and listen to my parents. So I finally sat down and with a tape recorder and interviewed my parents at length. And it was then that I found for the first time that my father had had actually a miserable childhood, that he'd beaten, that he always felt like he was the black sheep of the family. He didn't do well at school. And that basically it was my mother who had been the first person to believe in him and to believe that he could do more than he thought he was capable of, to believe that he could, come to the United States, at a time when it was very difficult to come to the United States, and be successful here. So I thought that was a great story in general, and so I wanted to write that. And at the same time, I was lucky because by then Taiwan had gone through its own evolution and now has free speech. And also, Al Gore had finally invented the internet. And so I had access to far more information. I was able to read George Kerr's book. I saw you edition of it in the other room, Formosa Betrayed, which is a very famous and justifiably so account of the February 28th massacres. So I was able to read that and to find a lot of other accounts and do a lot more research on what actually happened. And I felt that it was, well, tragic that it happened, but also tragic that it was kept silent, and tragic that nobody knows about it. And that even, when I told my parents about George Kerr's book, I was telling them, some of the details of what it said, and they were shocked because they didn't know. They didn't know the scope of things or what was really happening. So I really wanted to tell these twin stories: the story of my father and the story of Taiwan. It was sort of in parallel. And as I wrote it, and in subsequent years, developed the story, I realized I had to make a choice whether I was going to have this be the biography of my parents or have it be a true novel. And in the end, I made it into a true novel, which means that I took the liberties, with my parents' permission, I took a lot of liberties with the story to basically make it into as powerful and dramatic a story as I could. And at the same time, maintain historical accuracy. Because what I wanted to do was write a story that would appeal to mainstream readers in the US, and that would also introduce them to the history of the United States, of Taiwan, in a sort of an emotional way. And that's why really I chose to use a novel, because I feel that with fiction you can really see things through the eyes of the character and feel what the character feels. And it gives you a much more visceral appreciation for what happened at that time. So yeah, those are pictures of my parents and my brother. So a mere 12 years after I started the book, it was sold to a publisher, and it came out in 2013. And it's been really gratifying since then to talk to readers. I think that probably the majority of readers are actually American, and they don't know anything about Taiwan, but they just hear, this is an interesting story in an exotic locale that I don't know anything about, and so they read it and they're like, wow, I had no idea about Tony's history. Now I've learned something. Some of them don't even really care about the history, but they just read it for the story. And then I hear from first generation Taiwanese people that thank you for finally telling our story, and then a lot of those people buy the book for their kids to show them what happened. And for younger people like me, I like to think of myself as young anyway. I've also heard people say that it has given them a greater appreciation for what their parents went through, and it stimulated some discussions with their parents about what actually did happen. I talked to a friend of mine who's not Taiwanese, but she married a Taiwanese man, and she's just talking about her mother. After her mother-in-law read the book, she just couldn't stop talking about all this stuff. She said, everything in that book is true, and this happened, and this happened. So it's been a really wonderful experience. There's and over the time that it took me to conceive of and write this book, a lot of things have happened. There are lots of textbooks now actually that talk about Taiwanese history, and there's Wikipedia you can look up, and there's a pretty good account of what happened in 1947 and in the 40 years of martial law after that. There's even the 228 Peace Park and other memorials to to 228 in Taiwan. This is a memorial in the 228 Peace Park, and that is the story that I showed you. And I went recently in 2012 to Taiwan to research my next book, which I'm planning to put, which I'm setting in the 70s in Taiwan. It involves former political prisoners and the political activists at the time. So I went there, and this is the, I went over with my parents, actually. So those are my parents, and this is Ronald Tsao. He's the museum director of the 228 museum in Taipei, and also the museum that's on Green Island, which is Huishotou. It's an island where long-term political prisoners were sent during the White Terror. So he was kind enough to take me around for a week interviewing people. Frank Shea's over there, he helped translate. And this is the Taipei 228 Museum. And one of the interesting things about this museum is that it was created under the DPP administration, under the opposition administration, which finally had a opposition president in 2000. It was revamped under President Ma's administration, which is under the KMT, the nationalist administration. So as we went through the museum, Mr. Tsao was showing me the changes that the current administration had done to the museum. It was very interesting. So this is a famous woodcut of depicting the February 28th massacres. And in the original installation, it was quite large. It was almost the size of a wall. And in the refurbishment, it was very small. It was like a little plaque. And this is also a famous cartoon depicting the apple as China as a rotten apple infecting Taiwan. And this also had been quite large, and they squished it down to make it look smaller. So, you know, there's still a lot of work to be done. I just wanted to show also, well, this is just an excerpt from the World Book Encyclopedia of 2013, just in the sort of seeing what changes have taken place there. So now they mention the February 28th massacres, but it's not, you know, it sounds much, well, you can't see it here, it's too wide, but it says, you know, it calls the February 28th uprising the violent uprising, which, you know, there were some violence, but on the whole, especially after the first few days, it was mostly a peaceful attempt to ask for negotiations with the government. So, and also since then, you know, I have to say I was amazed. You know, all this time I was working on my book. For 12 years I was working on this book, and actually since 1989 I've been thinking about writing a book about Taiwan. And I was amazed that nobody else came out with a book came out with a novel about Taiwan. And now there's you know, there's been in addition to all the Chinese American authors. There's even a sitcom, Fresh Off the Boat, about a Taiwanese American family, Fish Whitaker. And I heard there's somebody else, I forget what her name is, but there's another book actually called Green Island that's coming out in 2016. And you know, I think that's really great. I mean, you know, there's more than one American novel, there's more than one English novel, and there should be lots of Taiwanese novels as well, because there are lots of different viewpoints, and it's important to, there are lots of different viewpoints, there's lots of different tastes, and you know, different books will appeal to different people, they will express different things, and I think it's important to have a multiplicity of voices. You know, especially from the different ethnic groups. So, show you some pictures also of Green Island, which is beautiful, by the way. It's now a tourist destination. there's scuba diving there. So this is me with a couple of, the two men are both former political prisoners. They were both on Green Island. The man on the top in the back, Mr. Huang, he was a post officer, and so what happened to him was he was made to take Mandarin classes because he needed to learn Mandarin. So with other colleagues, he took a Mandarin Chinese class, and then it was found that the teacher supposedly had ties to communist China. And so the whole class was arrested. And he got sent to Green Island for 15 years. So he said, yeah, everybody else got 5 years. I got 15, I don't know why. So, but he, while he was there, he made a violin. And at first he had a knife, and he found wood on the beach, and he used some gardening tools, and he would carve these things out, and then the guards would take it all away. So he would start again, and do it over again, and keep trying. And so finally they took away his knife. So then he went back to the beach, and he found a crock pot with broken glass inside, and so he used shards of glass to cut the wood. And finally, the guards gave up, and they let him complete this violin. And so that's the violin. And I got to play it, and it's amazing that he was able to do that. Just sitting at his bed with like no tools. And this man also, he also made a violin that's in the museum there. So this is the prisoners there were mostly, as I mentioned before, mostly they were targeting elite people, academics and things. So most of these people were highly educated, and they weren't idle. So even though they were in a labor camp working all day, when they had their free hour at night, they were busy, and they made a lot of incredible things. Actually, the main English textbook that was used in Taiwan for many years, I think it's Fundamentals of the English Language, that was written by a prisoner on Green Island. So, I think you got any money for that. So anyway, so in conclusion, I just want to say, I think I've finally figured out what that song, Rainy Night Flower, really means, or why it's so important. And I think that what it is that it's not just that the flower is dying, it's that the flower is dying in the dark, unseen and unheard. And I think the true tragedy of February 28th massacres is that nobody knows about it. We refer to it as our Holocaust. And I know other people have their own, there are other genocides in the world that are, maybe more, have involved more people, and they also call themselves this is our Holocaust. But I think, the difference is why people use the Holocaust as the yardstick, I think, in a way, is because it's so well publicized, because there are so many stories. There's a movie by Steven Spielberg. In a way, this is partly, I think, because the Jews were supported by the United States, by the West, and they sort of ended up on the winning side. They got their own state. Whereas everybody else, after the genocide, the suppressors continued to suppress the rest of the population so that they weren't able to express what had happened. But I also wonder, whether it's part of the Jewish culture to tell the stories of their history. Because, for example, my sister, we all married Caucasians, I'm sorry to say, but my sister married an Israeli American. And she converted, and so they celebrate all the Jewish holidays, and sometimes we go over every year for Passover. And part of the tradition of just being, being Jewish and studying, and the religion is telling the story. I mean, Passover is all about, you can't eat until you tell the whole story, and until the kids, repeat what happened, and everybody has to participate. Everybody has to tell part of the story, and there's this whole ritual, and when you finally tell the whole story, then you can eat. And I think, maybe by instilling that sort of tradition of storytelling, handing down these stories, year after year to the kids, I think, maybe you're instilling a sense of identity as well, and a sense of the importance of history and storytelling. And I think, in the case of the Taiwanese, for example, I think that has been so effectively suppressed. And so that people have grown up with the sense that it's better not to say anything or they'll get into trouble. And that has really hampered the sense of Taiwanese identity. And so I would just encourage people to continue to tell their story. I know some people, a lot of Taiwanese just tell their kids, oh, never mind about history, just study hard and be a doctor, be an engineer, and take care of yourself. But I think part of, and some people have asked me, how can we get your kids to, how can we get our kids to care more about Taiwanese history? And I say, tell your stories. To the kids, I say, listen, ask questions and listen to your parents. So anyway, I surrender the microphone, but thank you so much for having me.